So last week was fellowship.
Jesus Christ.
This week is forgiveness and salvation.
Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of A God We Could Believe In, a frank and honest look at Christianity as we find it today. We're going to be looking at the things the church says and does that are embarrassing, confusing, or even downright offensive. In other religious contexts, your questions might be forbidden, but not here. So whether you're a lifelong churchgoer with the scars to prove it, or you've never entered a church and are just interested in the debate, this is a safe space for you. In that spirit, we're diving headlong into questions of sex and relationships, covering topics from marriage and purity to sexuality and masturbation. We'll also be looking at issues of sexual relationships, abuse, gender and identity, so listener discretion is advised. Please look after yourselves. In this episode, we meet Lauren Jackson. Lauren's job takes her into schools to talk with young people about sex and relationships. Lauren shares about what her role involves and reflects on her experiences growing up in church and what advice she'd give to her younger self now. Over the course of this series, we've spoken to a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to broach this topic with the young people in their lives. So we hope you find this conversation as valuable and insightful as we did. I'm Tim Woodson, and taking the lead today is poet, former social worker and childhood friend of Lauren's, Rachel Hall.
All right, welcome back to A God We Could Believe In. I've been, let out of the doghouse this week, and I've been allowed to take charge of the podcast and do the introduction, which is very exciting. So today I'm here with Lauren Jackson, who is a friend and also a sex educator. We have known each other technically since we were born, yeah. Your dad was like the first non-relative to see me in hospital.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, that is true. So yeah, we've known each other for a very long time.
Yeah.
We were chatting like a month ago maybe in a coffee shop about the podcast, and your like entire face lit up and I was like, I have an idea. This is going to be good. So it might be helpful if we could just start with where your kind of interest in sex and teaching around sex began.
Sure, yeah. So I got interested in sex education when I was at university. I did my final year dissertation on how growing up in church impacts how people relate with sex when they get older. And yeah, threw myself into that, really enjoyed it. And alongside doing that was doing some work with a big student organisation called Discretion, who have societies in lots of different unis across the UK. And it basically is student-led sex education. So students sign up to this society and then they go into schools in their local area around where the uni is and they teach sex ed. So I started to do that.
I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, I did.
Was that with Uni of? For those that don't know, me and Lauren both went to university in Sheffield, but we went to rival universities.
We did, yeah.
And I think, according to the, newspapers, you went to the better university.
Surely not.
Well, I don't know. Anyway, sorry. So you did that through Uni of?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. And it still exists. Expression's still running. It's really cool. Unfortunately, when I was doing it, the pandemic hit just as I'd trained up.
Oh, no.
So all of my work with Sexpression then moved online. So I was doing some resource development online. I was doing some training. But yeah, I didn't actually get out to do the delivery in schools.
Okay.
But I was also doing my dissertation at the same time, was really enjoying that. And then I was also making kind of some quite big decisions about whether I wanted to stay going to church. And a lot of that was all being kind of impacted by my thinking around sex and sexuality. And probably a lot of what I was seeing and hearing from people I was working with at Sexpression and through my dissertation. So that was a big time for me in kind of thinking around sex at uni. And then I graduated. And then, as you can probably imagine, jobs in sex ed don't come around that often. It's quite a niche career to go into. So I did a couple of other roles. When I graduated, I moved back to Leeds and then, did some work for a few years in other organisations. But I always just had this little, kind of chatter in the back of my head that was like, sex ed, you really enjoyed doing that. So whilst I was working in a different role, so this would have been back at kind of back end of 2023, start of 2024, I started to research a little bit about where I could do some more sex ed training or volunteering. So I became a volunteer with an organisation called Brook, who are massive across the UK. They're like the leading sexual health and sex ed charity. Really, really good work. Trained up with them to be a volunteer in the classroom. So started to do some delivery with them. And then I also did a qualification in teaching sex and relationships education. So that means that I'm actually an accredited sex educator, which is quite cool.
You.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah.
we've got a professional on today, guys. No more of the amateurs.
And then so that all happened, and then a job just came up kind of close enough to where I was living, working with a sexual health service as part of their outreach and education team. And I went for that job and I got it, and I've been doing it for 1.5 years now. So yeah, my role is a sex and relationships educator. So I go around schools and college settings and teach young people, predominantly secondary age, so like 11 to 16 year olds, about sex and relationship topics. Sometimes it's in schools, sometimes it's in youth settings, and it's also sometimes in kind of one-to-one or small group contexts as well, depending on the needs of the young person.
Is there anything that has surprised you most about the lessons that you've delivered over the last year?
Gosh, a lot surprised me. I think I went into it with lots of assumptions maybe about what I would find. And one of the things that surprised me is how curious young people are. There's so much curiosity in the classroom about sex. I think as soon as you give young people the opportunity to be able to ask questions about sex, quite often they take that opportunity, and that's really nice. But also I was quite surprised about how much shame there is still around talking about sex with young people.
One thing that's interesting that you said there is that you said it's hard to find work in sex education. But one of the things I guess we've realised doing this project is there's so much need for it and so much demand for it. So why do you think that is, that there aren't that many opportunities?
I think the honest answer is probably funding
and
money.
Right.
It's not something that's necessarily being prioritised in education at the moment. You don't take an exam in sex education, and a lot of schools are focusing all of their resources on GCSEs. So I think that's a big element. I think that's the main reason, to be honest, is the funding. There's a lot of opportunities to do voluntary sex ed. A lot of organisations are looking for that, but schools don't have a lot of money at the moment, and quite a lot of schools are opting to deliver their sex education in-house, so they're using the staff team that they already have, which is sometimes great. There's teachers in schools who are really passionate about PSHE, they want to deliver it well, but there's also a lot of teachers who I work with who are incredibly grateful that I'm coming in to deliver it for them, because they did not sign up to teach kids about pubic hair and STIs. They want to teach geography. So
because it was always like a maths teacher when I was growing up, or it was definitely a bolt-on rather than a subject in itself.
I believe there's real value in having an external visitor in to deliver your sex ed, because I'm not going to see these young people regularly, so I believe that quite often that makes young people a lot more open and kind of willing to ask me questions, because they know that when they see me the next day, I'm not going to be expecting them to, I don't know, do sums or whatever. I also don't have any context to their families. Which is helpful as well.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was like, what are the aspects of sex that you have felt young people themselves care the most about?
I get a lot of questions in my lessons about how sex actually works. So like what sex is, what happens during sex, which is actually quite a difficult question to answer, because I believe that sex is really diverse and can look very different for lots of different people. But I think young people often really want a black and white answer. They want me to tell them this is what it is and this is how it happens. But I don't feel like I can do that, because that's not what I believe that sex is. But there's definitely a lot of questions on like the hows. What actually happens.
And do you think when they're asking those questions, they're asking like particularly about penetration? Because I agree with you. I would include oral sex. When we're talking about sex, it's not just penetrative sex. But when they're asking, do you think that's the thing that they're keen to know about?
Yeah, I think a lot of them don't know that there's anything that isn't penetrative sex, because that tends to be the focus, particularly vaginal sex. Penis and vagina sex, I would call that in a classroom, so it's really clear what I'm talking about. But I will very often mention oral sex or anal sex or like sexual touching. Their faces change because they don't know what those words mean. One of the biggest questions that I've been asked this half term, I think I've had it maybe 4 or 5 times, is how do 2 women have sex? Because there's not a penis involved, they're not able to access what that could look like. So if I am mentioning a woman who has sex with other women, they're like, what do you mean? How is that possible? A lot of them are not being taught what that could look like.
Are you seeing any like repercussions from like mainstream media or children watching pornography? Is there a difference between kids that you can tell have accessed that kind of more adult content than kids that haven't?
Sometimes it's quite hard to tell what kids have seen themselves and what kids have heard about, or just kind of... There's a lot of bravado in the classroom sometimes, kids like talking about things, and then when you actually go and ask them questions about it, it's clear that they actually don't know what they're talking about. It's just a word that they've heard. And it would be very rare for a young person to... I wanted to say the word admit there, but I don't feel like that's the right word.
That's what I was thinking, admit,
or to share with me that they've watched pornography. Because, again, I think there's a lot of shame around it, and also because, there's a lot of concerns. If an adult hears that a young person's watching pornography, then that can bring up concerns sometimes. I'm immediately then thinking, what have they seen? Where are they accessing it?
And also, particularly if it's something that a young person is enjoying, they're not going to want that to be taken away from them.
Exactly. So I think we're definitely seeing that in our lessons, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly where it's come from. But I hear conversations from young people about how maybe like sexual activities that people do that I feel like have probably come from viewing pornography. It's interesting thinking about pornography. The sex and relationships education has a curriculum that schools have to follow. It's been mandatory since 2020 for all secondary school students to learn sex ed. Parents can still withdraw their kids from sex education up until, I think, close to their 16th birthday, when then the young person can themselves say that they actually want to be back in the lessons. But one of the things that's just been introduced on the new sex education curriculum, which is going to be in action from September 2026, is the laws around choking in sex, because that's something that we know is very prevalent in mainstream pornography, and we know it's something that young people are seeing, but we also know that a lot of young people have no idea of the risks involved in that and kind of the laws around it. So the curriculum is kind of, there's clearly an awareness that these topics are being viewed by young people, that they're seeing them. That's now on the curriculum, which is brand new, wasn't there before that.
I'm assuming here, but do you talk about like nudes at all? Do you talk about sexual activity online at all?
Yeah, the online world is a big thing for sex educators now, and that curriculum that I just mentioned, there's a lot of new content on there about AI, deep fakes. So that's when people use AI to generate naked imagery of people using their face and then someone else's body. It's this thing that this kind of trend, I guess, that's kind of becoming quite prevalent in across the whole of society, but also young people are aware of it. But yeah, we talk a lot about online safety. Nudes is something that comes up a lot when we're teaching young people about the law. A lot of young people don't realise that you legally can't send a nude image till you're 18.
And I didn't actually know that until I went to university, and I was in like one of my first safeguarding lectures, like safeguarding children lectures, and the lecturer said that, and I could see the whole room going, oh god, I've definitely done that. And I was in school this week, and there was like safeguarding staff ringing the police to report sharing of sexual images, and it baffles me that kids don't know that.
I'll be honest, it's probably one of my least favourite lessons to teach, that one, because I see on the faces of a lot of young people that I'm teaching that they're then very scared. When all sex educators will teach about the law differently, but it's quite a difficult task to try and teach about the law in a way that is accurate and informative, and that's giving them the facts that they need to know, but that also is doing it gently and in a way that tries to help them to understand that if they have done that thing, then I don't want them to feel like we're telling them off. They often don't know that that's something that is technically illegal. So that's a tricky one to navigate. We set at the start of all our lessons, we set up like a group agreement or like an expectation for the lesson, and one of the things we talk about is confidentiality, and how if we hear something or someone shares something with me that makes me concerned about them, if they're at risk, standard kind of safeguarding procedures. But I've worked with a few young people who are quite shocked when we share that we have to pass things on. That's a difficult part of the job for sure.
Because I guess, I mean, part of the reason we're having this conversation is because we're thinking about sex and church. And what's striking about that to me is that obviously there is the country's laws. There is a legal responsibility of everyone in a country to be following a set of laws. But then in the church, there is a additional set of laws that adds on top of that. And I think one of the things we've been questioning is why is it so difficult to talk about sex? Why is that just completely not talked about? And I think there's maybe this thing of people being reluctant to talk about something because it means admitting something that they know is illegal or is against the law. And I think there's just like an additional an additional set on top of that. But is there a framework that can be used there, a sort of like a no judgment framework for that can be applied in a church context as well?
I mean, that's the ideal when we're having these conversations with young people. I think that they feel like whatever they share, if they want to share, that there isn't going to be a level of judgment. If young people are sharing information about their own sexual experiences, then that suggests to me that they're in a space that they feel comfortable in. So to me, it's a good sign because they feel comfortable. But something that I've kind of had to learn in this job is that once they've shared that thing, even if I really care about them and I don't want them to feel anxious or worried, if I have to share that with someone else, then it has to happen. But I should say here that I don't go to church anymore. I've not been in church spaces like as a kind of member of the community or congregation for a while. But growing up, being in youth groups and church spaces, I didn't feel that there would be no judgment. I felt like quite anxious about talking about these topics. I mean, even when I went to university, I remember a night where the student cohort at the church I was going to in Sheffield split the girls and the boys for an evening to go off and do some sex chats. We've all been there. Well, not everyone, but people who grew up in church, I think that's quite familiar. And I went and had this evening of nice food and then we got onto the sex chats. There must have been maybe like 15 to 20 Christian like kind of girls there. And honestly, I will never forget it. It was like a one after the other confessions of like, I've done this and I did this in my first year at uni and I've done this and I've done this. That didn't feel like free sharing of like complete feeling super comfortable. That felt like I need to share this information because I'm anxious about what's happened. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I had exactly the same experience with a group of Christian women on a weekend away. And like all the girls were like mingling around, like the boys had kind of gone to bed. And I was like, what are people waiting for? And like the leaders went to bed. And then there was one girl who was like, right, everybody gather around. And we all sat around and the exact same thing happened. And somebody started this like confession train, if you will. And people were like, oh yeah, I've done that. And like we were sort of looking around at each other like in complete bewilderment, like these people that within this kind of Christian community we'd held up as like, oh, they would never do that. They're, Christ-like, whatever adjectives you want to use, like they would definitely follow the, in air quotes, rules. People were admitting, to go back to that word admit, because it ties so neatly to shame. Like, I admit that I've done this thing that I've been made to feel guilty of, and I'm scared of the repercussions or the consequences of what happens if the other people that we are on this weekend away with find out. Like, what happens if the guys in the group find out? Will they look at me differently? Like, this whole concept of like virgin. Like, you are a virgin and you are pure until you are not. And like, I went to a poetry reading recently. Holly McNish, who I love, has a whole collection out, like literally in the last couple of weeks, called Virgin. And there's this poem where she writes about horror movies, and the virgins always die like beautiful deaths, and they look beautiful, and the non-virgins and the sluts and the whores, whatever, they die like really gruesome deaths. And this kind of image that we've all kind of collectively upheld of what it means to be pure and to be a virgin, and we feel kind of dirty when we are not that anymore. That what you described then with your friends and what I experienced, I felt such a sense of like desperation in the room, of just like people so holding on to this all so tightly, because these tropes of like what it means to be a so-called virgin and they're not, they stick with you, and you've grown up with that kind of ideology, and it's damaging.
Because sharing like that should be cathartic, but it sounds like it isn't in those contexts.
No.
It felt quite frantic, actually. It felt the opposite of cathartic. And,
Yeah.
and the thing that I think is interesting, and I want us to talk about this because, as we said at the start, we've been, we were in like pre-nursery group together. We've known each other a very long time. And it's taken us 25 years to have this conversation. Like, I don't think we've ever talked about it.
No.
And we've been with each other through, boyfriends and different partners. And we've never actually talked about it. But Lauren is a person I feel safe to do that with. And I think the difference is that those, and this is not necessarily their fault, but the kind of energy in those spaces with those other women wasn't like a, you're free to tell me and I won't judge you. It was almost like a, who's done the worst thing? Like, almost so that like if someone else has been fingered, but somebody else has had, penis and vagina sex, as you call it, well, they've done way worse than me. And it almost felt this kind of like, I need to relieve myself by knowing that somebody else has sinned harder than I have.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
It's funny because now that I've kind of done a lot of processing of those experiences and those conversations that I've had growing up, or even those kind of like internal feelings that I've had around sex. Now I talk about sex with my friends all the time, and it is very cathartic, like you say. It feels non-judgmental, it feels exciting, it feels fun, it feels supportive, but it's taken a long time to get to that point. And it's involved me finding friends and people who a lot of us have had that similar experience growing up and now view things differently, but also a lot of my friends have not had that experience and are quite frankly quite shocked at some of the things I tell them.
I remember moving into like houses with people after uni and stuff, and then hearing the way they would talk about sex, and like there's the maleness to it, and it's much more kind of conquesty language, but even just the openness with which they talk about it was shocking. I couldn't conceive of talking about it in that way.
What were they being open about? Like what had actually happened? Or?
Like exactly, just being like, this is like a breakdown, blow by blow, as it were, of. Sorry.
Great phrase, Tim. Great phrase.
Yeah. Of what went down, and like couched in language that they could laugh about. That was the way that they would talk about it. It wasn't supportive as much as like, but it also wasn't completely braggy either. It was a bit of like, I think it was just like this information sharing sets a context for what's normal in your life, and if you don't have an idea of what's going on in other people's lives, then you're assuming that I don't know, you just don't know what's normal. You've kind of, I'm at it again. You're feeling around in the dark. I can't stop.
This is like final level, like.
I think there's probably a level of repression I need to work through. But anyway, that's
for another time, Tim.
For another time, yeah. But I think. I guess like I've never learned open conversation about sex. So I don't think I found those friends, as it were. I
think the interesting thing you said there, like the key word for me is learned, and it takes practice. And I almost want to say to you, like, have you had sex? I assume that you have, but it takes that boldness of being able to like be brave enough to ask. And you've had experiences with friends where they've not reacted kindly to news that you've shared with them that is of a sexual nature, and that's tricky and can be off-putting, and it takes courage to talk about that thing again, or like, I don't know about talking to that friend, but maybe I should. And I knew that you would be a safe person to talk about it with, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was hard. We were in the same youth group as teenagers. Like, we
had our earliest relationships in that youth group as well, I think. Both of us met people and had our first experiences of relationships. I don't know if you did, but
it was around the same time.
We were navigating a lot through that, and we shared a lot of those experiences together, but still it takes a long time, because there's just a silence around it, or there was, and I would imagine that that's probably still there for a lot of young people who are growing up in church.
I kind of want to ask you, like, if we could go back and meet those teenagers. Like, you know, I remember us being in like the very room that we're in now, like having sleepovers. Like, we shared a lot of our lives with each other. We spent a lot of time with each other. I mean, your experience might have been different with other people in the group, but I don't remember veering anywhere near. The closest we got was like, what was your first kiss like? You know, that was kind of that kind of silly, giggly, like, oh, what was the first date like? And I don't think I would have known the questions to ask. Like, there was so much about sex that I just didn't know. I was just completely innocent and naive to a lot of it. And I wonder if you could go back and meet those versions of us or that version of yourself, like what you would say, like what's the one thing you'd want them to know?
Gosh, have you had tears on the pod yet?
No, but let them out. Do you know what? I was thinking this morning. I was like, we might cry because this is like, you know, but it's big stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. What would I want younger Lauren to know about sex? I think I would want her to know that the feelings that she's having are completely typical. I think I like typical over normal. It feels a bit better, but yeah, they're typical feelings and they are not things to be ashamed of. I think that word shame's come up a lot in the podcast so far. It's something that I've felt incredibly strongly around a lot of my sexual experiences, particularly early on. I would want her to have a loud voice, somebody telling her that she doesn't need to feel any shame for what she's doing or what she's thinking about or what she's kind of intrigued by. That's the biggest one.
Yeah, I think for me, I would agree. And I think particularly for me, it starts with masturbation because that's where my like sexual experience started, was like sex with myself. And the thing that was really interesting is, like, I remember starting to have those feelings when I was about 13, and we were like deep in the youth work then. Like, you know, I would sort of have these thoughts and feelings and like behave in a physical way and didn't tell anybody. I literally didn't tell anybody for years and years and years and years. And it's taken, you know, a long time to be like, this was the age that I started and that was a very normal thing to do. And I think, yeah, my one piece of advice would be like, if you start to feel this way in your body and, you know, however we want to describe that, like, you know, what does lust feel like? You know, I don't even think the poets know. But, you know, if you start to feel certain things in your body, that is okay. And I like that we're typical of like, you know, obviously asexual people exist, but, you know, you don't have to be afraid of that feeling, and desire is not something that you need to be fearful of, even though you might have been taught in church spaces to fear it.
Definitely. Yeah, taking all the fear out of it would be great. Well, actually, saying that, some of the fear or the anxiousness around sex is well placed, because it is a big thing, and it is something that is very vulnerable and intimate and has the potential to have a big impact on someone's life. And I understand that, but the fear around actually what's going to happen if I do it, or am I doing something wrong? I'd like to see that gone.
Because I guess like the laws are in place to protect people. That is a reason why it's still 16, isn't it? Is the legal age of consent, and like there's good reasons for that. You wouldn't want to take those out, but it's that thing of like, if two 15-year-olds have been experimenting, and that it's like the laws are there to protect you. They're not necessarily there to condemn you either. Like,
No. When I'm doing lessons about law, the age of consent is a big thing that comes up. And I always say that this is what we call a protective law. It is not there to make you feel scared or worried. It is there to keep you safe, basically, from unwanted sexual activity or anything that might go alongside that. A lot of young people are very curious about, they'll pitch age scenarios to me all the time. If two 15-year-olds have sex, if a 15 and a 16-year-old have sex, what's going to happen? It's very, very unlikely for young people to be prosecuted if they're having sex and they're kind of close in age and close to being 16, so like two 15-year-olds, like you said. If the sex is consensual, if they are not being pressured or forced, and it's unlikely. But kids will be like, but is it illegal? And I'll have to say, well, yes, it is technically against the law, but it's very unlikely that young people would be prosecuted for that. It's just, it's really unlikely.
Yeah.
I think going back to the question you asked me earlier, Rachel, about what do young people care the most about, they do really care about the law and about confidentiality and about there's clearly a lot of fear and anxiousness around that element of learning about sex and what's going to happen if I've done this and I'm worried about this. And I don't know if that also comes back to this idea that a lot of young people feel like they can't talk to anyone about it. What's going to happen if I do? And I can really understand how anxious that must make them feel.
Yeah, you said earlier, like, you didn't feel that there was somebody or an adult in your kind of church spaces that would listen to you judgment free. Did you ever feel like, I would like to talk to my friends about it, but I can't, or I don't want to? Like, is there something that held you back?
In my friendship group growing up, I think I was probably one of the last ones to start exploring sex. So I think I was hearing a lot of experiences from my friends and was noticing things, and they were talking to me about it. And I wonder if maybe that was actually something that made me think, oh, okay, maybe it is okay if I try that.
Were these friends non-Christian?
Mixture.
Okay.
A mixture, yeah. One of them was kind of stepping away from church stuff quite quickly. And then, yeah, a couple of us were still in church, and then some of them not in church. I think I was one of the last ones, so I'm not sure that I was necessarily holding back, although maybe I was, because I still wasn't having those general conversations about sex, even though I wasn't having experiences at that point. Still wasn't having like general chats about it until I was maybe, I reckon, 16, 17.
I think the thing that's really funny is it just didn't occur to me at all that any one of us could be doing it.
Do you know?
Like, and that's the funny thing that makes me laugh now, is like, well, of course we were.
Yeah. I live with a school friend at the moment, and she wasn't a Christian. She wasn't brought up a Christian. Not that long ago, she made reference to a lot of the people in our year at school being sexually active, and I was like, what? Really? And she was like, yeah, loads of people were having sex. And I was like known as one of the like Christians at school. I didn't go to a Christian school, but there were like 4 of us in our year, one of which was my twin sister. I've got a twin.
Big up twins.
And yeah, I was known to be like the Christian at school, and was
It's
very
horrible,
open.
that, isn't it? It's awful.
Now I reflect on it negatively. At the time, I think I found it as like a bit of a...
I felt quite smug.
Yeah, like a bit of something I was quite proud of, which I guess in a way is maybe quite nice. But yeah, I had no idea that people in my peer group at school were having sex until I was, about 21.
You have a child? How?
It's interesting because my friend who told me that knew that. So were people not telling me that information because they maybe knew that I was a Christian, or they knew maybe I'd shared things about what I felt about sex? Because when I was at school, I mean, the RE curriculum might look different now, but we were learning about being gay, we were learning about sex before marriage, we were learning about abortion, some of these big topics that come up in kind of Christian debates. And I was very, I'm not having sex till I get married. I think that's a really good thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's why people weren't talking to me about it.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting is, like, I agree with you. I was definitely of that mindset of like, well, this is the right thing to do, so I won't. And I think in some ways I'm really grateful, because it kept me from, I think, doing things too early or with the wrong people. And like that kind of like, oh, if I do this, will it be okay? And I'll do a little bit of that, but I won't have proper penis and vagina sex. And in a way, I'm kind of grateful that, you know, I didn't have those experiences with people that didn't care about me enough, or like weren't the right people. And it meant that by the time that I did do that, so I was 18 when I had penis and vagina sex, and it meant that I did that with a person that like I knew deeply cared for me and loved me. But I think it's interesting, and I don't think I had a lot of, I mean, I did have non-Christian friends, but I wasn't around them a lot. So I think there was definitely like the archetypes of people at school that were having sex, and, you know, there was a group of lads particularly that made it very known that they were having sex.
Do you think they were actually having sex?
No. No, I think, but actually some of them, yes, because, you know, we live in a day and age where you can record it, for example.
Oh gosh.
Which, I mean, like, I've got a god sister who goes to the same school that I went to, and I wrote my dissertation on something similar, but more towards the angle of sexual assault. And she was like, oh yeah, I was just in in, you know, so-and-so's classroom, like a teacher that I had, and there was a guy in front of me in lesson looking at, you know, explicit photos, videos, imagery of his partner, just showing his friend in the middle of class. And
Absolutely
I think,
horrendous.
like, so some of them, yes, because I'd be like walking behind them and could see it on their phone. But other people know. And I think it was just a kind of thing that you said. Because, you know, if a phone is not in the room and you both agree to say, yeah, we'll just say we did it, who's going to, you know, who's going to challenge that? But I think for the non-Christian people at school, it was definitely like everyone's, I remember somebody telling me like they were about 14 in class, like this song that they'd had sex to. And it was like that normal to talk about it. And I remember being like, why are you telling me? Like, and it was, you know, it was almost like, because I had this reputation of like being one of the Christian students in the school, it was almost like they were sort of gauging to see what my reaction was, which I think is interesting.
It's interesting, that pressure, isn't it, that young people feel to potentially, like you say, lie about early sexual experiences, or this bravado that a lot of young people might have. And I will say, particularly boys will have this kind of like, they'll talk the talk in lessons, and then when I talk to them one-to-one or follow up with them about something, it's like they're a different person.
Yeah.
But the average age of first-time sex in the UK is 17, so it's actually a lot older than people realise. And the students I teach, we talk to them about that in year 9, so when they're 13, 14, and a lot of them are really shocked about that. I think the age range is something like 17 to 23.
Really?
It's there's probably maybe more recent stats now, but
Wow.
it's much older than people
interesting.
realise.
Yeah.
I feel I should say here, the aim of sex education is not to get kids having sex
Just have
before
sex,
they want to. Of course not. What the research shows is that actually when you give young people inclusive, accessible, informative, accurate sex education, that they will actually delay when they first have sex.
Right.
The age that they have sex for the first time will be later.
Do you feel that the sex education that you had prepared you to have safe sex for the first time?
I think it prepared me to have physically safe sex in terms of like sexual health. Like, I feel like I understood that I could get pregnant if I didn't do things that potentially would stop that. At this point, I wasn't even thinking about queer sex. I was only thinking about having sex with people with penises. So I was like, I knew that. I don't think I knew very much about STIs, but I did know about pregnancy, definitely.
Yeah.
But what I didn't feel prepared for was how to have emotionally safe sex.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of safe sex when we say that word. It's I didn't know how to navigate pressure around sex. I didn't know how to navigate conversations about sex with partners. I probably had sexual experiences that I maybe didn't actually want to have, or felt maybe a bit confusing, but I didn't have the tools or the skills to talk about that with the person I was having those experiences with.
So I think one of the subtexts of what we've talked about is that, and like across this series so far, is that there's a lot of emphasis on what one shouldn't do and how to not have sex. But do you feel like the conversation is moving on to a more positive framing of sex? So things like factoring in emotional safety and like, is there a more positive framing around it?
I'm hopeful that there is. Yeah. I mean, everybody who works in sex ed teaches about sex differently.
Yeah.
But there's a new focus in the new curriculum on young people thinking about sex and consent as more than just the law, but also thinking about ethical consent and decision making and what that might look like. And I think it's dependent on who's delivering it, as it is with the law, which is maybe not the answer you were after. But
No. It's helpful just to know what the landscape is, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a lot of the conversations I have with young people in my lessons, there's definitely not as much kind of shame or horror around sex as there was when I was in those lessons, which suggests that something is changing. But there is still some there. So yeah, but that's a big hope for me, that we will be able to just approach these conversations with the positives rather than the, you need to be scared about this and it's really important that you don't do this. And there's a sex educator who I really like who talks about something called should stories. Don't know if either of you have heard that term before, but the idea of like a should story is like, we've all had them. They're like stories that we've been told about what should happen in situations. So when I did my dissertation in my last year at uni, I took a quote from one one of the people who I interviewed for the title, and the title was, in quotes, "You're going to have sex with a man when you're married because that's just what happens."
Right.
So that's a good example of like a should story. That person had been told that that's what should happen and what was going to happen. And there's a lot of people working in sex education now that are trying to get rid of those should stories. And I think this is probably something that youth workers in the church as well could think a little bit about in terms of how they're talking about sex, is trying to get rid of those, this should happen, this is what you can expect, and instead creating a little bit more room for flexibility and difference.
Yeah. Sort of emphasizing like that everyone is different and you will bring different things to sex, and you should I've added a should there, and wouldn't it be great to just be able to navigate that in the way that feels right and comfortable and safe for you, and that will look different than other people's experiences, and that's great.
I think that's where we're going to get that positive kind of discussions of sex, like you just mentioned, is when we acknowledge and reassure young people and adults. I think adults need to hear this as well. Sex is different for everyone. And actually, that's really beautiful, I think.
Yeah.
That people experience sex in loads of different ways. I just think that would take away so much of the pressure and the assumption and ideas that, oh, this hasn't happened for me yet, why? Or I'm not feeling like I've been told I should.
I think we're missing, like, one of the main points to having sex is to have fun, and for it to be pleasurable. And what is fun and pleasurable for one person is not the same thing for a different person. And I think my thing is, like, if you're not enjoying yourself and you're not having fun, like, regardless of whether you like orgasm or not, for example, like that being a should thing, like both partners should orgasm, for example, like, as long as you're having fun, something is going well.
For sure.
Yeah.
I agree.
We've had one of my old youth workers actually kind of reach out to offer some thoughts, particularly on how they approach talking about sex to young people. And one of the things that they've shared is there's a kind of sense that there's like a right thing to teach, and that there's a kind of power imbalance between adults talking to children about sex. And within school, you've mentioned that curriculum, that there's kind of a boundary there of like, these are the things that we're kind of, in air quotes, allowed to say. These are the things that we're supposed to teach. And I think when we think about youth workers, it's a lot freer, and there isn't really a boundary there, and that can create a sense of anxiety potentially for adults that are working with young people, and young people are asking them these questions, and they're like, I know in terms of Christianity what the right thing to say is, but in terms of this young person in front of me with lived experience that I might not know anything about, what the right thing to say is there. And with regards to safeguarding and age appropriate language, and I wonder if you could share some advice, and this could be for parents as well, but how do we approach those conversations with young people in our lives outside of a school context?
The first thing I should say about the curriculum in schools is that that's what schools have to teach, but they do often go off that curriculum as well. I work in a school, for example, that has a really amazing, they call PSHE in that school Life and Society, which is quite a nice name for, I think. And she goes off that curriculum as well as delivering, but not all schools do that. But I think I see it as being a real benefit, being able to have these conversations with young people outside of school, because you are gifted with time, which you don't have in school context. So there's time and opportunities to revisit topics, or to do like a series of sessions maybe on lots of different topics that young people are thinking about. I think there's a few ways that you could approach thinking about what to talk to young people about. You mentioned age appropriateness there, but something that we talk about a lot in the sex ed space is age and stage appropriateness. So as well as something being age appropriate, which of course is really important, and that's something that a lot of parents are particularly aware of, understandably, but sometimes also things need to be stage appropriate. So when you are outside of a school setting, you might have a little bit more freedom if a young person brings a topic to you in conversation, or you can tell that it's something that's happening in your youth group, to be able to think, okay, well, this is clearly on the minds of the young people I'm working with, so maybe it's worth doing some work with them on this. I would always include the young people in thinking about your sessions. So if I was to approach working with a group of Christian young people, a nice thing to do maybe would be to do like an initial session with them, getting them thinking about some of the topics that they'd like to learn about. So giving them a little bit of choice about what might be nice for them to learn about. Of course, they might say some things that youth worker or youth team are like, we don't want to talk about that, or we're not sure that we're best placed to talk about that, which might cause other questions or maybe some signposting to other resources. But that's a nice way to help young people to feel involved in sex ed, which I think in school isn't always possible because it's mandated somewhat. But also you can get parents involved as well. So the new sex ed curriculum, a really big thing on it this year is involving parents in discussions around sex education. It's probably the topic at schools that parents have the most opinions on.
Yeah.
I really understand maybe the confusion or the overwhelm or anxiousness that youth worker is feeling about where to start or what to discuss, because you are trying to please a lot of people in that role.
Yeah.
You've got parents and families, you've got the young people, you've got maybe your church leadership team, your youth team. Like it is going to be impossible to please everyone in that situation, but something that can really help, I think, is to be open with all of those people about what's being discussed. So you could have parents in for an evening, like an informal evening, talk a little bit maybe about what you want to include. I guess it's up to that team and what they know about those young people, about whether they might talk to parents or the young people first and which order to do that in. Of course, if you're going to have that initial conversation with young people, then you will need to preface it by saying we might not be able to cover all of this. But I think not being afraid to let young people see that this is complex.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite good for them to see that you're trying to do it in a way that works for them, but also that keeps parents involved, and to present it simply on a list, this, and this is what we're going to cover is maybe not going to be the best way to approach talking about these topics.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who could help with that process or kind of advise that youth worker on where to start, I guess. I chatted to Rachel before we recorded about putting together a list of resources.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
So I'm going to do that, and I'll include in there places that parents could go to, but also resources for young people. There's so many really helpful resources out there for accessing sex ed info, but then also advice on how to have those conversations.
Yeah.
I would also say try not to approach it as a one-time thing. Try to approach it as a little and often.
Yeah.
Embed it into your other discussions that you're having with your young people. So if there's a TV show or some lyrics or something that young people are kind of on their minds, then link it there. This is probably more for parents maybe than youth workers, but it's okay for young people to know that you don't know the answer to something. I love it when young people ask me a question and I'm like, I actually don't know what that is. I'll just say it. And then I'm like, we can look it up together. If I think it's appropriate to look up, then I might look it up with them. Or I might say, I'm going to bring back the answer to that next lesson. There's real value in young people seeing that process. I'm a big believer that adults, we don't know everything about sex. We're all still learning. The other thing I would say is for parents is try to practice your poker face a bit, maybe. So if your child says something to you and your immediate response in your body or in your brain is, oh my God, where have they heard that? What am I going to say? They will notice what your initial reaction is. They will hear or see your reaction. So try to practice kind of welcoming the questions from your young people. As I said earlier, if your child is asking you a question or is bringing a topic to you, that is a really good sign, I would say, because it shows that they're comfortable and you've created a space that they feel like they can talk to you about that in. So be aware of your first response to it, I think. And like I said, if you don't know the answer or if you need some time to work out how you want to respond, then just say that.
Yeah.
Could I ask about if people that are listening whose children aren't as forthcoming as others, like if they've have teenagers and they're like, I'm pretty sure my teenager's having sex with his girlfriend and I want to talk to him about it, but he's not, he won't talk about it, or he's not forthcoming, or, I know that my daughter's got a boyfriend, but every time I try and talk to her about sex or contraception or consent, she just shuts down. I wonder if, in your experience so far, working with those young people that do clam up and are like, I don't want to talk about this, it's really embarrassing, kind of, have you got any advice there for, like, how they approach that?
I think that's a tricky one, isn't it? That would be a nice opportunity maybe to use some resources. So you could send your young person a link to something. There's a website called Bish, which I'll include in the resources that I put together, that is an incredibly detailed, just amazing website that has articles and resources on basically every element of sex and relationships that you can think of. And it's written for young people. It's pitched for 14 up.
Okay.
So I wouldn't recommend it for under 14-year-olds, but that's a nice place to send young people to. There is, of course, going to be times when, if you're concerned about a young person, your child, maybe if you're worried that there's a risk of something where you might just have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But you could even say, I'm actually quite nervous to talk to you about this as well. I understand that this is something that is not comfortable, and this is putting me out of my comfort zone as well. And can we do this together? And here's a resource, or drawing on talking about it generally as well. So rather than approaching it with your young person at the centre, even though that's what you'll be doing when you're having the conversation, you could talk about it more generally. So linking it to I don't know, a friend or
that movie
a TV
watched,
show, a movie, something like that. Young people will find out information about sex in other ways. If they don't have adults who.
Yeah.
Why do you think I went to see so many rom-coms at the cinema?
Wow.
Yeah.
Got to get it where you can.
Yeah.
I was wondering about things that fall outside of like the traditional teaching of like basically cis-het kind of relationships. So if young people come with questions about or if there are parents who don't, like, that's not been part of their experience up to now, they don't understand that there's a wider gamut of sexual experiences.
I think with that's probably a topic that a lot of parents are the most anxious about. And if it falls outside of their knowledge or their kind of understanding, then my first piece of advice would be to try and get a bit educated around that.
Yeah.
If there's somebody in that adult's life that is part of that community, maybe having a conversation with them. I'm always happy to talk to people about that. But yeah, kind of finding people or resources. Again, I keep talking about resources, but they are so valuable.
Yeah.
Because it's an easy way to have a think about those topics without necessarily maybe having to have someone sat next to you. Which,
like a more neutral way of introducing a topic.
Exactly.
Or,
yeah.
One of the questions that you'd asked him to put forward to you, Lauren, was like, that's that kind of single bit of advice, and we've talked about that maybe for like our little selves, but kind of, what's one thing we would tell girls, what's one thing we would tell boys, and also what would we tell trans and non-binary kids too?
I knew this question was coming, and I'm going to be honest and say that I had to set myself a bit of a time limit on thinking about this, because genuinely I was like, how on earth am I going to choose one piece of advice for this? But it's a great question.
I guess it's like what's the one, like, if they take away one thing, what's that?
Let's start with girls. So I think this is very linked to what we shared earlier about what we would tell our little selves. But my one piece of advice for girls would be that if and when you come to starting to thinking about sex, or it becomes something that you are interested in or that you have questions about, I would want them to know and remember that that is completely normal, and that is something that we all, or a lot of us, think about, and that it's not something that I want them to hide. I want them to be able to talk about that. I wrote down here that I'd want them to be able to find safe people or places that they can share that journey with, and remember that they deserve to have those experiences when they are ready, and when they can understand them. So that would be my piece of advice for girls. For boys, my one thing would be that having conversations about sex is really very likely going to make that experience better, I think, for all involved. A lot of the boys I work with, I think, don't understand that necessarily, that talking about it is important. Something that I sometimes say in my lessons is that if you're not ready to have a conversation with your partner or whoever you're having sex with about sex, then I would maybe argue you're probably not ready to have sex with them, because these conversations need to be happening before, during and after, and that's really important. So yeah, for boys I would really focus on, those conversations are really important. And
you know, ask people what they like, and you know, if your partner is enjoying it, you're more likely to enjoy it.
Not normalize being given feedback. Yeah, definitely. Again, of course, we're talking here about young boys, but I'm thinking about when or if those boys decide to start having sex. Then, I wrote down here, get comfy taking tips. It's really going to change things for everyone. I really do believe that. So can
we get that on a t-shirt?
Yeah. And then for kind of people that fall outside of that, so maybe non-binary, trans, gender diverse young people, the one thing I would want them to understand is that how they experience their identity and how they will come to potentially experience sex in relationships is really valid, and it's really beautiful. And part of what I would want them to understand is that they deserve to have access to sexual health inputs and sex education that includes their experiences, that is inclusive of their experiences. Sometimes I will be teaching and a young person will ask me like a question about how sex works or what happens during sex, and when I'll explain it, I'll think that's quite funny when we think about what we do to each other during sex. Like, it is quite confusing and a bit, if that's the first time you're hearing about it, it's strange. So for young people who are not seeing or having conversations about how they might come to experience sex because of how they experience their body or their identity or what their body looks like or feels like, it's even more confusing. So yeah, I would want non-binary, trans, gender diverse young people to know that however they will come to experience sex in relationships, if they do, is super valid and really exciting and beautiful. And again, just coming back to that point of sex looks different for everyone, and that's something that I think we should celebrate.
Yeah, I agree.
So those would be my things.
Do you think you could take what you do into a church context, like into a youth group? Like, have you had much experience with people in a church context engaging with the work that you do?
I haven't had a lot of experience taking it in, but I feel a lot of overhanging anxiety about talking to some Christians about my work, because I am quite aware that a lot of them might maybe disagree with what I do or maybe have insights about the job that I feel are maybe harmful or that are tricky. So I haven't had loads of conversations actually with Christians, but there's definitely a part of me when I'm in church spaces that feels the need to maybe hold back a little bit about my work, because I'm aware of what they might think or say. I have had a lot of experience talking to my parents about my job, and they are Christians, as is my sister and my brother-in-law, and my experiences with them have actually been very positive, and I'm very grateful for that. They're very celebratory of my job, and whilst they maybe don't understand exactly what I do or what I maybe the details of what I talk about in my work, I think they can see that I'm really passionate about it, and that I'm that I enjoy it, and maybe that I'm good at it. And then they,
that's not a maybe. You definitely are.
And they celebrate that. So that's been healing in a way. In fact, they won't mind me sharing that actually the process of coming onto this podcast has brought up some really, really important conversations with my mum and dad about how they taught me about sex as a young person. I told them that I was coming on the podcast, and just brought this conversation into our kind of like family discussions for a little bit. And I have shared things with them, particularly with my mum, that we've not talked about before, and I can see that it's caused my parents to do, I think, quite a lot of reflecting maybe on their own choices that they made when they brought us up, and for that I'm just like so grateful. It's felt very healing in a way.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right, that's it, Tim. Job
Yeah,
done.
I
We
think
need
that's
to do nothing else. Cool. Thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you about this stuff, and it feels like long overdue and freeing at the same time. And we really appreciate your brain and your time and your energy. I think this will be something that, you know, listeners really appreciate. And yeah, the advice that you've shared will be unmatched. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I've really enjoyed it. It's a bit of a full circle moment to be able to talk about work and church stuff in one conversation. It feels, healing and enjoyable.
Great.
Thanks
Lovely.
so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in any of the resources that Lauren mentioned, there will be links in the description. If you'd like to chat with Lauren about anything mentioned in the podcast, including support on how to open up these conversations with young people, send us an email at agodwecouldbelievin@gmail.com. In particular, Lauren would love to hear from church leaders or youth pastors who are looking to broach the topic of sex and relationships within a church context. If you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. Episodes are released every other Monday, and the next episode in the series is next Monday, 24th of November. Simon picks up where Charlotte left off to explore the evolution of Christian marriage to its present-day context. Lastly, a reminder, if you'd like to support the project, maybe share it with friends, family, or even heck, the young people in your lives. As always, you can patronise us by subscribing to agodwecouldbelievin.substack.com. Here you'll receive bonus episodes and regular reflections from Simon and the team right to your inbox. We'll see you again very soon.